All right, good evening. Welcome back to another Trek Talk live stream here on Classic Comics. So, I'll be taking a look at another episode of the original Star Trek series. Today, I'm going to be looking at this is in production code order. This is episode 15, Court Martial. Uh, I'll just say right up, it's not one of my favorite episodes. It's not really not all that great, to be totally honest. Um, okay. This is written by Don Mankiewicz and Stephen Karabatsos, and directed by Mark Daniels. And let me bring this up. Here we go. All right. Now, this is from an NBC press release for January 16th, 1966. Captain Kirk is charged with negligence and brought to trial following the disappearance and reported death of one of his officers in court martial on the NBC television network colorcast of Star Trek on February 2nd. Investigation into the presumed death of Officer Finney, who was lost during a hazardous assignment aboard the Enterprise, discloses evidence that Captain Kirk may have perjured himself in his testimony regarding the incident. Kirk's case appears hopeless until a little known fact in Finney's past is inadvertently revealed by his daughter. And Cushman writes, the captain's accuser in this case is the Enterprise's own computer, which offers the damning visual evidence needed to convict Kirk. His primary adversary is Ariel Shaw, a prosecutor at the court-martial hearing and a former love. She offers further evidence to show that the late Ben Finney had a grudge against Kirk, which may have been motivation for the captain wanting Finney off the ship. Kirk's only hope is an outdated defense lawyer who harbors a grudge of his own against the mechanized and dispassionate world of computers. The theme, the battle of man versus machine, is a fallacy. It is always man against man, for man is the machine's creator. The hook seems irresistible. The Kane mutiny in space. Well, the idea of doing well, actually, I'll hold off on that. We'll go ahead and get into the episode first. All right, so the Enterprise begins in orbit over a starbase due to damage it received in a recent ion storm. Ion storm is one of those outdated things you see in older sci-fi. Kirk submits a sworn statement that during the storm, he went to red alert and at one point had to jettison a pod of some kind that a crewman named Lieutenant Commander Finney was working in. Kirk insists that he waited till the last moment to jettison the pod and he had no choice, but had to do so. Then Finney's daughter arrives and has a meltdown, blaming Kirk for her father's death and calling him a murderer. And to make matters worse, Spock provides computer logs that contradict Kirk's statement, showing that Kirk jettisoned the pod early before going to red alert. Commodore Stone, the officer that Kirk is reporting to, says that an investigation will have to be carried out and Kirk will face a court martial for perjury and negligence. Kirk and McCoy go to the station lounge, and Kirk tries to make conversation with some of the officers, but they pretty much give Kirk the cold shoulder and make it clear that they think Kirk is guilty. Then a lady wearing what appears to be some kind of furniture upholstery comes in and introduces, or rather, McCoy introduces himself to her. This is Ariel Shaw. And surprise, surprise, she is an old flame of Kirk's. Commodore Storm Commodore Stone questions Kirk about his relationship with Finney. Kirk and Finney were close friends for many years, but in fact, his daughter Jamie is named after Kirk. But years ago, they were serving on another ship together, and Finney left, as Kirk says, a circuit to the atomic matter pile open, which would have destroyed the ship if Kirk hadn't caught it. Kirk reported the incident and Finney was reprimanded. In the years that followed, Finney's career stalled and he has always blamed Kirk for it. Now, Commodore Stone asks Kirk to explain the discrepancies between his statement and the computer, and Kirk admits that he doesn't have an explanation. Stone suggests that Kirk may have made a mistake due to exhaustion and the stress of the job of being a starship captain, and says he will bury the matter and quietly have Kirk reassigned to some kind of desk job if he'll cooperate. But Kirk sees this as admitting he's guilty and he refuses. So Stone orders a court martial. And Kirk's like, order a court martial. I demand a court martial right now, mister. So Kirk goes back to the lounge and sees Ariel. He tries to make conversation, but it turns out that, surprise, surprise, she's going to be the prosecutor on the case. Kirk is surprisingly kind of dense here because she's dropping all this information about the case and about the prosecution. And Kirk's kind of like, how do you know so much about this? And then he's like so surprised when she's like, yeah, I'm the prosecutor, dummy. She then recommends a lawyer named Cogley to Kirk and then she leaves. So Kirk goes back to his quarters on the starbase, and the lawyer, Samuel Cogley, is already there in his quarters waiting for him. And Cogley's basically supposed to come across as an old school type lawyer. You know, the entire room is filled with books, which Cogley, I guess, takes with him everywhere he goes, which must be difficult because there's more books than any one person can carry. It would take, probably half a dozen people to carry all these books. And then he grumps about computers and then talks about how important the law is and how he's dedicated his life to it and all that. Now, the next day, the court martial begins. And this is notable because in this episode, we get our first look at the Star Fleet dress uniforms, which make their first appearance in this episode, and it certainly won't be the last time. And Shaw calls on Spock to testify first. Before that, though, they ask Kirk how he pleads. He pleads not guilty. So Shaw then calls on Spock, and she asks Spock to confirm the findings of the computer records, which he does, but then he insists that the computer record must be incorrect, asserting, in effect, that Kirk is incapable of making an error. Shaw does get him to admit that this is only his opinion, though. And then they ask Cogley, do you want to question Spock? And Cogley's like, nah, I don't want to question him. So Spock steps down. Then they call on McCoy. And before that, they call on a female officer. She's like some kind of records officer or something. I don't remember. But she basically confirms the history of Kirk, you know, catching the error that Finney made and Finney getting reprimanded for it. And they ask Cogley, "You want to question her?" No, I don't want to. I don't want to question her. So then they call on McCoy, and he comes to the stand. And Shaw then questions McCoy about Kirk's state of mind, asking if if he knew that Finney didn't like him and resented him, could Kirk have then developed resentment towards Finney because of that, and maybe that would have motivated him to get rid of Finney. And while McCoy tries to hem and haw around it, eventually he doesn't. Well, yeah, technically that is possible. And then they ask, here, let me. Then they ask Cogley if he wants to question. He's like, nah, I don't want to question. No questions. And then he says, basically, look, let's just get to the heart of this. And he says, I want to question Captain Kirk. So they put Kirk on the stand. And Cogley then makes a speech about basically how this is, how it's the machine that is accusing Kirk, and then demands and basically asks Kirk, did you jettison the pod before the red alert? No. Did you hate Finney? No, I didn't. Then they show the Enterprise log, and it shows the bridge, and they're experiencing some turbulence from the ion storm. Kirk calls Finney and tells him, hey, we may need to jettison that pod you're in, so be ready to evacuate it. Then they show Kirk hitting yellow alert, and then subsequently show him hitting the button which is labeled jettison pod before issuing a red alert, which of course contradicts Kirk's story. Hey, Joe Dog. Thank you for stopping by, sir. Good to see you. And DJ Play Nice as well. Good to have you both here. Thank you for stopping by. And it's a thing I'm going to come back to throughout this episode. Is Cogley, to me, really comes across as being fairly incompetent as a lawyer. He does an absolute crap job. Even though he's supposed to be like this great lawyer and all that, I don't see it. He basically just botches this whole thing. Because I mean, his whole defense here basically is to decline to question anybody else, decline to present any evidence that might defend his client, basically just get his client on the stand, ask him a couple of simple questions, and then say, well, let's just look at this evidence. And then it shows he's guilty, and Cogley's like surprised. It's like, dude, you're the defense lawyer. Didn't you review this stuff before the trial? I mean, I'm not an expert in the law, but this is like, I've seen a few legal dramas. Isn't that kind of like standard stuff? You review the evidence that's being presented against your client. I mean, yeah, like get Saul Goodman in here or something. Okay. I lost, I lost. Yeah, look at Cogley's like, what? He's guilty. What is going on? It's and Kirk, of course, is now understandably Kirk is surprised because he's like he's all the while he's been like, I know what I did, and I know that's not how it happened. But then he sees it and he's like, that's not how it happened. Okay, so afterward, Cogley basically tells Kirk, you might want to change your plea to guilty and try and go for a lesser charge and maybe a lesser sentence because he basically giving up and saying, well, the computer showed you're guilty, which is, the whole time he's been railing about how, oh, computers, what do computers know? They don't know anything. And we can't take a computer's word. And then when the computer shows he's guilty, then Cogley's like, oh, crap. Well, since you're guilty, you probably want to plead guilty. It's like, oh my God. Okay. Um, okay. And even Kirk, he even begins to question whether he made a mistake. Maybe he's remembering it wrong. Then he's contacted by Spock, who says he's gone over the computer and checked it out, and no discrepancies found, nothing unusual. And then after that, Jamie shows up, and Jamie has done a complete 180-degree reversal. And now instead of thinking Kirk is a murderer, now she thinks Kirk is innocent, or at least she wants Cogley, begs Cogley, oh, you've got to help Jim, you've got to help clear his name and all this. And her reversal is kind of odd because why the change? I mean, all we saw in the trial was basically evidence that he's guilty. So why does she now feel differently? It doesn't make any sense. Um, okay, so back on the Enterprise now, McCoy comes to I guess this is probably the meeting room, like right, the staff meeting room, and finds Spock playing chess. And of course, he's outraged because Spock is playing chess instead of trying to figure out how to clear Kirk's name. But Spock notes that he has now he's playing against the computer, right? And he tells McCoy that he's now beaten the computer 5 straight times, or I think it's actually 4. And then he defeats it for a 5th time, or maybe it's 6, 5 or 6. And McCoy says, well, that's impossible. And Spock says, correct. The computer's incapable of making a mistake. So really all Spock should be able to do is play to a draw against the computer. He shouldn't be able to beat it over and over again like this. And of course, then McCoy realizes what that implies. Something's wrong with the computer. There's an error in it somewhere. And this could be the proof they need to at least kind of help Kirk. So they prepare to beam back down. In the courtroom, they ask Cogley if he wants to question anybody else or if he has any further evidence to provide. And Cogley, like I say, I mean, this guy's useless. He's basically like, nope, nope. The defense rests. Never mind that the defense to this point has basically been just saying, let's see what the computer says. I mean, if I'm Kirk, I'm pissed. If I'm Kirk, I'm thinking this woman set me up with this crap lawyer deliberately so she can win this case. But fortunately, Spock and McCoy arrive and they let them know about the computer. And then Cogley, never missing an opportunity to grandstand, gives another speech about, and to be fair, I mean, it is a good speech. And I do like what he says about, basically when we take the testimony of a computer in court over people, we're elevating the machine over a person. And kind of the inherent danger of that, and that we assume machines are infallible and stuff like that. And that's well said, and it's more relevant than ever. But again, does this really prove Kirk innocent or anything? I mean, it's just he does a lot of pontificating, but he doesn't do a lot of actual defending of his client, you know? But anyway, they move to or Cogley requests to move the trial back to the Enterprise, which for some odd reason the court agrees to. So they go back to the Enterprise, where Cogley questions Spock about the computer, and Spock relates the whole thing about how he was able to defeat the computer over and over again, and this implies that there's some sort of error in the computer because that shouldn't be able to happen. Then Cogley questions Kirk about the whole incident with Finney again, and he asks, was the body ever found? Finney's body was never recovered. And he asks, was a search done for the body? Yes, there was. Nothing was found. And then Cogley asks, if a person, basically, if he were alive, would he be able to evade that search? Would he have enough knowledge of the ship or something like that? And Kirk says, well, yeah, I guess he could. Finally realizing the possibility here that maybe Finney never really died. So then they move to the bridge. And again, I mean, the amount of leeway that the court gives Cogley and Kirk is pretty wild. I mean, it's pretty almost hard to believe, honestly. But basically what they propose to do is they evacuate the ship. They basically evacuate everyone off the Enterprise except the people that are here on the bridge. And then they use the ship's sensors to detect the heartbeats of everyone that's still on the ship. Then McCoy goes around with this device, which is clearly just a microphone, and he uses it to remove their heartbeats, basically eliminating one heartbeat after another, till eventually they've eliminated all the heartbeats on the bridge. So there shouldn't be able to detect any other heartbeats. But there's another heartbeat still. And that's when the court, oh, hey, Adega. Hey, man. No problem, sir. No problem at all. Thank you for stopping by, as always. And so now Stone's finally beginning to kind of get caught into the idea that maybe Finney's alive. And then, I mean, I'm sorry, but what happens next is so ridiculous. So they theorize that he's probably hiding somewhere down in engineering, right? That's probably because that's the best place to hide, which kind of recalls The Enemy Within, because that's where the evil Kirk was hiding, if you'll recall, when Kirk and Spock go looking for him. So then Kirk basically decides that he's going to go down to engineering to find Finney. And he says, this is my problem. Let me handle it. And Stone, Commodore Stone lets him. I mean, it's like, okay, wait a minute. Now, just a little while ago, you were basically putting this guy on trial. I mean, you still are putting this guy on trial for murdering the guy because you think Kirk might hate him. And now you're going to give him a phaser and let him go down to engineering to confront this guy alone. I mean, why would, first of all, wouldn't you have a couple of red shirts for security or something? I mean, don't most courts have bailiffs? And I think maybe that's what this guy is, because he's around and he's not one of the presiding officers. So maybe that's what he is. But I mean, again, wouldn't you send him? Wouldn't you send this guy down to find Finney? Why are you letting the accused party go down to confront his accuser with a potentially lethal weapon in his hand? I mean, it's just like, what is going on? So anyway, he goes down to engineering, looks for Finney. Eventually, Finney reveals himself and finds Kirk, disarms him. And it's pretty clear that Finney's just, he's nuts. And he gloats about wrecking Kirk's career, or trying to. But then he reveals that since he failed to destroy Kirk's career, he's going to take the thing that's most precious to him, which is the Enterprise. And it turns out he has drained the ship's, I forget, he's like drained the energy banks or something like that. So, because in order to do the whole thing with the heartbeats, they had to eliminate as much noise as possible. And that included shutting off the engine. So the ship was now just drifting in orbit. And they mentioned previously that the orbit will begin to decay, but Quirk's like, well, we hope to be done by before that becomes a problem. Well, of course, it becomes a problem because now they can't restart the engines. And Kirk calls up to the bridge, and they confirm that the engines are dead. And surprise, the orbit's now beginning to decay. So now we have a ticking clock. But then Kirk reveals that Finney's daughter, Jamie, is on the ship. So now she's going to die too, along with everyone else. And Finney freaks. And of course, this goes to the whole thing of what a just dumb plan this is. I mean, I'll talk about that in a minute. But Finney's whole plan doesn't make a lot of sense. And then that gives Kirk the opportunity. They get into a brawl. Kirk kicks his butt, of course. And then Finney, after he's subdued, reveals how he sabotaged the engines. Kirk goes to this Jeffries tube, yanks some cables that allows them to get the engines going again, and they are able to correct the orbit and save the ship. Afterwards, Shaw and Kirk talking, and Shaw reveals that Cogley is going to be defending Finney now. To which I say, well, Finney's probably screwed then, because Cogley is just ridiculous. And all's well that ends well. So, I mean, what was Finney's plan here? And I'll talk about this in a minute about why the plot to this episode is such a mess. Because and when I get into the behind the scenes stuff, because there is an explanation for it, to be fair. But what was Finney's plan? So Finney, okay, he fakes his death to frame Kirk, and he tampers with the computer. Okay, fair enough. But how long has he been hiding in engineering? If you see him, he's got this kind of 5 o'clock shadow, which suggests he's been down there for a little while. Now, I don't know an exact time frame, but if you consider the time from the incident, so the incident in the ion storm happens. Now, they don't say how long it takes the Enterprise to get to the starbase, but figure, I don't know, a day. Let's say at least a day, maybe a day or two. Then Kirk makes his report. The discrepancy is found. Now, at least a day passes, it seems like, before the trial begins. And then we're on the second day of the trial. So I'd say conservatively, anywhere from about 4 to 7 days have taken place here. 4 to 5, maybe 7. How long was Finney going to hide down in engineering? You know? Right. Yeah, I mean, he clearly didn't think this through, and I guess maybe you could explain that he's just so deranged by his hatred of Kirk, because he does come across as quite nuts, honestly. But I mean, how was he planning? He couldn't fake his death forever, so how was he can't stay hidden in engineering forever. How is he going to get out of there and presumably have to get off the ship? Well, either he's going to have to steal a shuttlecraft, which obviously is going to draw attention, or use one of the transporters. And again, I don't know, I would assume all the transporters are staffed all the time, like around the clock, probably. I don't know, maybe there's like some emergency transporter or something, maybe, but why didn't he use that? Why didn't he do that instead of staying hidden? I mean, there's just it doesn't make a lot of sense. Okay. Let's go ahead and get to the behind the scenes information here. So I'll go back to Cushman's book. Okay, so while the idea of doing a courtroom drama in outer space is interesting, and Court Martial certainly has its moments, the overall execution is clumsy. Agreed. The story, which went through too much rewriting by too many different writers, four writers in all, with a lot of string pulling by a fifth writer, has lots of plot holes and leaps of illogic. Yeah. Um, and they go through several things here, most of which I already mentioned. And they do reveal in this chapter in the book that Court Martial went through more rewrites than any other episode of the original series. It got heavily rewritten, and that's part of why it is, and by several different writers. That's why this thing is such a mess. It's hard to damn any work of fiction that has a clear theme and boldly makes a statement, and Court Martial certainly has its supporters. In conjunction with the theme, it is a unique story with a handful of engaging scenes, creating an episode the viewer wants to like, warts and all. Yeah, well, that's a matter of opinion. Okay, so it was written by Doug Mankiewicz. Don Mankiewicz. Don Mankiewicz was the son of a legendary screenwriter, Herman Mankiewicz, who shared an Academy Award with Orson Welles for co-writing Citizen Kane. His nephew Joseph was the Oscar-winning writer-director who wrote the screenplays for Guys and Dolls and All About Eve. And they had another nephew, Ben, who wasn't born yet, and Ben Mankiewicz is currently the host of Turner Classic Movies. So this is very much a Hollywood family. Don had written for television series such as The Naked City and 12 O'Clock High, and was nominated for an Oscar of his own in 1959 for co-writing the film I Want to Live, which I'd never heard of. He had never tried his hand at science fiction, but had provided 6 scripts for the Supernatural series One Step Beyond. It didn't seem to matter to Roddenberry that Mankiewicz was a novice at sci-fi or that he lived and worked in Long Island, New York. Between Herman, Joseph, and Don, the Mankiewicz name represented a screenwriting dynasty that Star Trek in these early days of looking for acceptance would have trouble saying no to. Don Mankiewicz was visiting Los Angeles and dropped by for one of the early screenings of Where No Man Has Gone Before on the Desilu lot. Mankiewicz recalled, "My impression was that they needed what in those days would have been called a bottle show. Something that could be done very cheaply, that didn't require a lot of blowing up of anything. And I believe I suggested a courtroom show. I'd done many of those in the past, a novel and a screenplay. So I said, why don't we do a court martial? Let's put Kirk on trial. And it would have to be a trial of that time. We're not going to bring in human characters if we can use electronic characters. So the witness against Kirk would be a computerized device that can reveal everything that happened and seems to nail him. So we started with that. The outline for the original title actually was Court Martial at Starbase 811. And it began a period of story and script development unlike any other in Star Trek's history. No story went through more changes than this episode, and echoing Cogley's distrust of electronic media, there is more misinformation in cyberspace about the writing of Court Martial than any other episode. So here's kind of what the rough plot originally was. So Kirk is suspected of creating a situation on the Enterprise, which allegedly resulted in the death of Records Officer Finney, who had a grudge against the captain due to a past disciplinary action. Finney's friend, Farley, stationed on the bridge, is willing to lie under oath to help bring Kirk down. The computer of the Enterprise, which is called in the early drafts is called the IRRU, Information Reception and Retrieval Unit, has developed a personality, and it is fond of Finney, whose job has been to maintain it. And the IRRU doesn't like Kirk either, to the degree that it is also willing to lie on behalf of its friend. The IRRU is the true culprit of the story since Finney is presumed dead and missing throughout much of the episode. Now, Finney's father, Finney Sr., is at Starbase 811, and he accuses Kirk of killing his son and does all he can to see the captain's hide is nailed to the wall. Additional irritants for Kirk are the prosecuting attorney Shaw, who was a man in the early version, and Harbor Master Sherrick, who would later become Stone, and numerous peers of Kirk who are all quick to assume his guilt. On Kirk's side, Spock and a father-son defense team, Cogley and Cogley, that's junior and senior. The latter Cogley, who begins the story as the second chair defense lawyer, is a throwback to early 20th century Earth and has a big axe to grind against computers. The backstory has the Enterprise encountering a force field resulting in the ship's mass being too great to maintain stability. And Kirk has no choice but to reduce the mass of the ship by jettisoning the after cabin. Okay. But Farley, who is Finney's bunkmate, tells a story that is different in one essential particular. According to him, Kirk hit the jettison button several seconds before the breakup warning light went on, and so altered the ship's characteristics that he caused the near breakup. In other words, Kirk either panicked or he cold-bloodedly jettisoned the after cabin to get rid of Finney. And obviously, this thing went through many, many rewrites. Mankiewicz said, I wanted to have a country lawyer, an 18th century lawyer that lives in the 23rd century, or whatever century this was. I just wanted a man out of place, a guy who uses books. With a computer, you get abbreviated information and you can't look back at it and make underlines. There are unspeakable advantages in just a plain book. Mankiewicz revised his original outline, simplifying the story somewhat and eliminating a few of the cost factors and taking out the idea that man would be submissive to machines. And that's another one of the things because Mankiewicz had said that they wanted a bottle show, but the early version he was proposing was actually going to be very expensive because there were going to be all these flashbacks that show the breakup of the ship and the pod being jettisoned and all this other stuff. Roddenberry worried that the drama of a military court martial was being overshadowed by the gimmick of a vengeful computer. So he wanted the script rewritten so that the ship's computer doesn't have it out for Kirk. There were many other new differences in later drafts, phasing out the IRRU, such as elimination of the costly idea of the Enterprise being put into space dock for major repairs. And Cogley Jr. and Cogley Sr. were then cut down to just Cogley himself. Let's see, then there were more rewrites. I'm not going to go through all these rewrites. This would take for a long time. Okay, Roddenberry later said Star Trek was action adventure. It was a human conflict. And if done properly, it was these things before science fiction. There was a wonderful premise underneath all the layers of gimmickry in that story, and I decided the best thing to do was to strip it down. As it was, you couldn't see the forest through all the tree with all the sci-fi stuff that was cluttering it up. A military court martial in the year 2180 had the potential of being far more interesting and dramatic than the gimmick of a computer that wants revenge. Okay, so Gene Kuhn did a script polish dated September 29th that focused on finessing dialogue, demuddling the muddle, and not adding in any new scenes or characters. Another polish came on October 3rd, the day more notes arrived from broadcast standards, again resulting in a few lines of dialogue being changed. These came on the morning that the episode had started filming. Okay, so Mark Daniels, let me, yeah, here we go. So Mark Daniels, who many believe to be Star Trek's touchstone, returned for his third directing assignment. He had little to suggest regarding the script, but did have some thoughts about casting. The African Canadian actor Perry Rodriguez was hired to play Commodore Stone. Rodriguez had a commanding presence and often found roles that were unique and inspiring for Black viewers. He played a doctor on Ben Casey, a sheriff on The Fugitive, an African leader on The Man from U.N.C.L.E., a debonair assassin on The Wild Wild West, and now Commodore Stone. Joan Marshall played Ariel Shaw. There, can I find a? There she is. She was one of the leads of TV's Bold Venture series in 1959 and often worked for Warner Brothers, doing episodes of Maverick, Bronco, Surfside 6, Hawaiian Eye, and 77 Sunset Strip. Jean Kuhn already knew her. She had been cast in the pilot film for The Munsters as Herman's wife, Phoebe Munster, who would later be renamed to Lily Munster. But fearing that Phoebe Munster was too much like Carolyn Jones's Morticia Adams on the Addams Family, Marshall was replaced for the series with Yvonne DiCarlo, who would play Lily. And I can't show it to you, but they have a picture of her in this thing done up as Phoebe Munster, and yeah, she looks a lot like Morticia. Looks pretty good too, I gotta say. Okay, Elisha Cook. Let me see if I can bring him up here. I guess that's good enough. So Elisha Cook Jr. Was hired to play the old school attorney Samuel Cogley. He had over 200 screen appearances at this point, including working with Humphrey Bogart in The Big Sleep and The Maltese Falcon. He had taken direction from great directors such as Howard Hawks, John Huston, and George Stevens. Richard Webb, who played Finney, he was a 1950s TV icon of a sorts. He was probably best known for playing the title character in Captain Midnight in the 1950s. He was 50 years old at this point. Winston Windelugo played the hostile officer named Timothy in the Starbase Lounge. Let me bring him up. There he is. So he's the guy in the red there, I believe. DeLugo was a stage actor having his first try at TV because he knew Joe DaGosta, who was the casting director. He had also been booked around the same time to do an episode of Mission Impossible. Hagen Beggs played Lieutenant Hansen on The Bridge. Well, I won't bother bringing him up, but because I'll keep it on this guy DeLugo, because he relates an interesting story about Shatner here in a minute, so I'm gonna stick with him. And also, Majel Barrett did the voice of the Starbase computer, in addition to doing the Starfleet computer. Okay. Oh, also, so on day 4 of filming, by the way, they do mention that day, the issue of Daily Variety that was published on day 4 of filming on Court Martial included stories about rumors coming from NBC that Star Trek was going to get a full season pickup. Now, the official word wouldn't come until the following week. Now, on day 5, they were filming the officers' lounge scenes. And when DeLugo relates that, so anyway, Shatner comes in and we do a rehearsal. And I was surprised at how small he is compared to me. and he starts to say something about the old gang at the academy, and then he looks up at me, and then he suddenly calls cut. He calls cut, not the director. And he reaches out and grabs Mark Daniels and pulls him away and whispers to him. And then Mark Daniels says, "All right, folks, we're going to take a break. Relax, go to your trailers. We have to make some changes." When they called me back, I see that they've changed the set around, and all of a sudden there are these bar stools. And Mark says, "Okay, Win, you need to sit here." And I'm thinking, oh, okay, I get it. I'm too tall. A few days after this incident, TV Guide published an article on Shatner, who was quoted in the article as saying, "I've gotten a great insight into the omnipotence of the series lead. Everybody does his best not to upset the star. It's an almost unique position few in the entertainment world achieve. It's like absolute power." And DeLugo added, "So we start with Shatner's stuff first, and we're shooting over my shoulder at him. And now he's standing and I'm sitting. And then the scene starts, and as things are going along, he starts to tear up. And he calls cut and calls for makeup. And he goes off behind somewhere. Then he comes back, and we do that part of the scene again. And again, he starts to tear up. And again, calls cut and goes behind the set again. Uh, and the third time I thought, well, things always happen in three, so this has got to happen again. It actually would happen four times, and this was the kind of scene where we had to hold each other's gaze because my character is just inches away from throwing a punch at the guy. And then he asked for a minute, and he disappeared somewhere. DeLugo, yeah, I mean that's a theme you come back to again and again. He's not the only guest star on Trek that I've heard talk about that. Like I remember seeing an interview at a convention where I forget the guy's name about it, but it's the guy that played Apollo. Because the actor that played Apollo, he's like 6'4". He was a tall guy, and it was a thing with him too. Apparently, Shatner did not want to be in the same scene with him, like on camera next to him, because he was so much taller. Um, DeLugo knew nothing of the immense demands on Shatner as the star of the series and the relentless workload that came with the job. He couldn't know that Shatner's average workday was over 12 hours long, 5 days a week, with his weekends spent reading scripts, all the while trying to squeeze in a moment here and there with his two daughters and struggling to shore up a marriage that was in the process of collapsing. Near the time of this episode's filming, Shatner told a magazine writer, quote, "I hope that since my wife Gloria and I are reasonably intelligent people, things can be worked out. But we are having difficulties. Even under ideal circumstances, a couple nearly always has some marital problems. But when you add to ordinary circumstances the stress and strain of doing a show that occupies almost all your time, you have extraordinary problems." He was only gone for a brief amount of time, DeLugo said. How he composed himself or what he did so fast was beyond me, but it went beautifully after that. He was so cool and composed. He was like a different person, except that when he finished his camera shot, he walked away, and he's walking across the soundstage rapidly. And I said to Mark, "Where's he going?" And with that, Shatner opened the outer door, and bam, he was gone. And Mark said to me, "Don't worry about him. I'll work with you." And so they basically set up the camera for DeLugo's scenes, and then Daniels just stood behind the camera and basically held up his hand and said, "Look at my hands," and deliver your line. So in this scene, when he's talking, he's actually looking at Cushman's hands. Shatner's not even there. And then let's see if I can get to the other guy. Where is he here? Oh, I think it's in the other one. Let me bring that up. Okay, yeah. So this guy here, this was Hagen Beggs, and he played Lieutenant Hansen. and he would do it here, and then he would do the next episode as well. And they don't say much about him. He was Canadian, and apparently he had worked with Jimmy Doohan some before this, so he knew Doohan. Um, where did it? Okay, I skipped over it. Yeah. Hagen Beggs confirms that Shatner was not his normal self during production of this episode and the next. He said, "My friend was really Jimmy. I had a pleasant relationship with Spock and Bones. Very nice, very comfortable. Shatner less so. He was always professional. He just didn't seem to get involved with us too much. He sort of did his work and then disappeared back into his dressing room. At the time, I felt, well, no wonder he has a lot of stuff to learn. He has to stay focused, but in my opinion, he was slightly focused and separate from the rest of the cast, who were more inclined to sort of stick around and chit chat on the set. He didn't. As soon as his scenes were over, he'd go, thank you, and then he'd disappear into his dressing room." Hmm. And Mark Daniels apparently didn't really like doing this episode very much. He says, while we were making court martial, we all felt like, oh God, this is a dog. Let's just get this over with. Part of the problem was that it didn't have much action in it. Also, Elisha Cook couldn't remember his lines. When you're on a 6-day schedule trying to stay on time, you got to keep stopping and going back. It drives everyone crazy. You've got a courtroom scene and you're photographing him one line at a time because he can't remember to keep two together. Okay, so this episode premiered February 2nd, 1967. The first half hour was second in the ratings, behind Bewitched, narrowly beating My Three Sons, and then the second half hour actually won its time slot, just barely beating out a show on ABC called Love on a Rooftop, which I've never heard of. Uh, Despite the numbers from Nielsen and mostly positive feedback, many of those responsible for making Star Trek were not fans of this episode, and it did not get a repeat viewing over the summer. Now, when DeLugo didn't stay upset at Shatner for long, he said, "We all used to hang out at the Rain Check on Santa Monica. That was where all the actors got together. And this was like a month and a half later. And Shatner sent a drink over, invited me to his table to make up for that day. He was with a date, and he really amazed me because in making introductions, he told the girl what he had done to me on the set of Star Trek. I was really bowled over that he was so open and forthcoming. He didn't try to hide anything. And then he apologized for it and shook my hand, and that was very classy of him." Don Mankiewicz said, "I was very pleased with it. I didn't care for how the end was changed, losing the daughter and adding in the narration. It's just that the show was so good that I would have liked to have seen that part done differently." And Mark Daniels again was like just glad to get this episode over with. So yeah, this episode definitely one of the weaker in the first season in my book. Uh, I'll give this one like a C minus, I guess. That's about the best I can offer for it. All right, so I will go ahead and stop here. Too many writers, yeah, too many cooks, that sort of thing. But, and one thing when you read this book is you see how many people, have their fingers in the pot because you've got the writer, and then you'll have the producer, which in this case was Kuhn, and then the executive producer, which is Roddenberry. Then you'll have like the top guy, like the big wigs at Desilu, like Justman. And then you've got the people at the network, like Solo. And then you've got broadcast standards and practices, they get a say as well. So when you've got all these people having input, and that's assuming even with just one writer, it's not surprising how many of these episodes just go through multiple rewrites, and it's yeah, you wonder sometimes. Overall, the results are good. I mean, I think we all would agree that most original series episodes are actually very good, but boy, sometimes it really does get away from them. And you agree C minus? Yeah, yeah, I think that's about right. Okay, so next week I will do another Trek Talk. Next week will be the Menagerie, I believe, which I'll just cover parts 1 and 2 for that, which is episodes 15 and 16 in production order. Um, oh, and I almost forgot. I wanted to say. So this past Saturday I passed 700 subs, so that was great. And thanks to all who did sub. And also, of course, before I go, I'll mention if you haven't subbed, please do sub to the channel and please do like this stream and check out some of my other videos while you're here. Maybe share the stream as well if you would. Um, Now, my last video I released was I did an AI trailer for a sort of fictional Thundar the Barbarian movie, kind of a teaser trailer type of thing. And I'm working on a full length trailer for that right now that'll be about 2 minutes long, maybe a little more, maybe, which I hope to have out by the end of this week. I've had really good response on that. And as of this point, it's gotten over 24,000 views, which is definitely the most I've had in that period for any of my videos. So I think I'm going to be moving in the direction of doing more stuff like that, more kind of these sort of trailers and maybe some other related stuff. And I will probably stream on Sunday evening at the time I usually do, around 7. Anyway, thank you to those who did show up for the stream. And again, please do like and do sub to the channel before you go. And I will see you all next week.